In a debate recently with YouTuber Jangles Sciencelad, who is totally awesome and who you should all totally go subscribe to, Vincent James made it a point to open by completely plagiarizing Numbers USA. Fun fact, if anybody's interested, Numbers USA was founded by a white nationalist. Vince steals his demonstrations from white nationalists. But that's not all he takes.
We can go back all the way to Robert Putnam.
No, do it. Yes, go to Putnam.
Robert Putnam's study on diversity shows that the most diverse areas of the country tend to vote less. They tend to trust each other less. We're talking about more people slipping through the cracks. This was a study of nearly 30,000 people across the country. It was the largest study on civic engagement ever done in America. It concluded that that the greater the diversity in the community, the fewer people vote, and the less they volunteer, the less they give to charity, the less they work in community projects. In the most diverse communities, neighbors trust one another about half as much as they do in the most homogenous settings. The study, the largest ever on civic engagement in America, found that virtually all measures of civic health are lower in more diverse settings.
E pluribus unum is a lecture given by Robert Putnam on the damages to social cohesion as a result of diversity. Now, if I were Vincent James, I would leave the story there and let you believe that diversity is just that bad. But I'm not Vincent James. I don't shovel shit for a living. I actually read this lecture from beginning to end. Putnam does detail decreases in social capital, and he also simultaneously notes that those decreases dissipate over a generation as different communities assimilate to one another and coalesce around a new, different identity. The reason the decrease happens in the first place, per Putnam, is regressive attitudes causing a self-segregation between any two groups. Vincent James is one of these people who reads headlines to weaponize against you. He does not care about truth. He cares about what he can overwhelm his opponents with, and an absolute gish gallop of information most people would not have the time to research. Unfortunately, I do have that kind of time. This from Robert Putnam himself in E pluribus unum. Tolerance for difference is but a first step. To strengthen shared identities, we need more opportunities for meaningful interaction across ethnic lines where Americans, new and old, work, learn, recreate, and live. Community centers, athletic fields, and schools were among the most efficacious instruments for incorporating new immigrants a century ago, and we need to reinvest in such places and activities once again, enabling us all to become comfortable with diversity. Most immigrants want to acculturate, to learn English, for example. Expanding public support for English language training, especially in settings that encourage ties among immigrants and natives of diverse ethnic backgrounds, should be a high priority. Since the long-run benefits of immigration and diversity are often felt at the national level, such as scientific creativity, fiscal dividends, and so forth, whereas the short-run costs, which are fragile communities, educational health costs for example, are often concentrated on the local level, there is a strong case for national aid to affected localities. Scientific examination of immigration, diversity, and social cohesion easily could be inflamed as a result of research becomes part of the contemporary political debate, but that debate needs to be informed by our best efforts to ascertain the facts. It would be unfortunate if a politically correct progressivism were to deny the reality of the challenge to social solidarity posed by diversity. It would be equally unfortunate if an ahistorical and ethnocentric conservatism were to deny that addressing that challenge is both feasible and desirable. Robert Putnam would find Vincent James to be a disgusting person, simply put. The only way Robert Putnam's research can support Vincent James is if James purposefully omits the parts he dislikes. Putnam does not deny the benefits of diversity, he celebrates them. This wasn't the first time in the debate Vincent James twisted somebody's words to support his agenda. Specifically, Jorge Borjas was strawmanned, and a bastardized version of his work was presented as truth.
Unfortunately, this is not the case. If we look to something that George J. Borjas mentions a lot, the Mariel boat lift, 200,000 Cuban immigrants moved to Florida within a matter of 4 months or so. The wages of the high school dropouts who lived in Florida, the natives, decreased by about 15 to 20% or so. So we're talking about, obviously, it's economics 101. It's very simple. You increase the supply. Obviously, these corporations are not going to have to compete for the worker. The worker is going to have to compete for the corporation. Again, when there is a low supply of workers in a particular job market, it's we're seeing things like poaching from other corporations, from other companies, paying higher wages. This is of course outlined in several different stories about meat packing plants and poultry plants that we can go through today as well.
The Mariel boat lift incident was a mass surge of refugees into the Miami area, some 200,000 new workers. Conventional economic theory would have figured a grand displacement of workers, but the opposite happened. Vince is falling for a classic lump of labor fallacy. A fallacy which asserts that there's a fixed number of jobs available, and thus he seeks to limit the resources to match those jobs. It's wrong because for every one laborer who comes, they also act as a consumer, somebody who needs clothing, food, entertainment, what have you. What people spend is what I earn, and thus the Mariels created a variety of complementary jobs because they spend. The first major analysis into the effects of wages was done by David Card in a landmark study which found negligible effects on wages. Borjas' follow-up found a slight depression in wages, specifically amongst high school dropouts who were most likely to compete with the Mariels. But far from the displacement that James presented, the decline was exclusive to a fraction of low-wage workers, since the type of work most people would do would be different from that of the Mariel refugees. New jobs opened up with better compensation because the supply of resources grew as a result of the Mariels. Jorge Borjas found the opposite of what James presented. The Mariel migrants grew the local economy and helped the workers there. Now, did some people get displaced? Absolutely. A small minority, which is what Borjas said promptly before declaring all the benefits they brought as well. Benefits which Vincent left out because he is simply dishonest. The Mariel boat lift is a case study in how mass migration grows economies and not hurts them. Restricting immigration based on a fraction of displacement is akin to killing the internet to save libraries. Miami experienced far greater benefits from the Mariel boat lift than they did drawbacks, and when Vincent presents this case without any nuance, he is both lying to you and disrespecting Borjas, who, like Robert Putnam, would find Vincent James to be a disgusting human being. Side note, I love the irony of Vincent James citing an immigrant economist while warning of the perils of immigration and economics. A final note on that debate was Vincent James's over-reliance on anecdotes to demonstrate his points. On more than one occasion, he made it a point to bring up anecdotes as a substitute for data, because the data he had was actually weak, and investigating it any further would have eviscerated his case. Kaiser Williams has a great video on the validity of anecdotes and data that I'll link in the description, and I encourage you all to watch it. Anecdotes are bad math because they bias perceptions towards certain results, even though the broader data might disagree. Anecdotes are an exploitation of the availability heuristic, and Vincent James abuses this heuristic maliciously because the data is so overwhelmingly contrary to his preferred political bias. Specifically, immigration reduces crime. Rather than rely on the data to demonstrate a broad truth, Vincent relies on anecdotes to bias the audience's perception of truth, a twisted version of it. To quote Kaiser Williams, "At the end of the day, personal stories which we can relate to move us more than numbers and graphs, even if we like to think we rely on the latter more than the former. Keep that in mind when evaluating anecdotes and data to form your own opinion." In closing, this isn't really a video about the benefits of diversity, or even the lack thereof. My politics on this should be clear if you don't know. Rather, this video is in defense of truth. Whether something is good or bad is a matter of opinion, but whether or not Putnam said this or Borjas said that is not. These are factual claims Vincent James is making, and he's either only telling half the story or he is flat out lying. More than the racism and homophobia which oozes from the pores of his arguments, his dishonesty is the single most disgusting attribute he has. He abuses truth. He works backwards from his conclusion, finds data to support it, and abuses that data if he has to. And when he can't twist the truth any further, he uses anecdotes. This is simply unconscionable.
That's fine. I think that's fine. So if a guy pays for my tab,
I think I'm getting your attention. I feel like I touched a vampire touching holy water.
can I help you?
You know how
They
I
want to
know?
go in.
Okay.
Because it's Wednesday.
Should I close it?
And Wednesday night